Hi everyone, I'll kick us off now. I'll make a start. There might be a few people turning up still, but that's fine. We'll carry on. So welcome to the Xamarin 3 Birthday Bash. I see we've got quite a lot of new faces and quite a few familiar ones. Just out of interest, can I get a show of hands as to how many people are already using Xamarin? Okay, that's a good number, and a good number just looking at it, I guess, and trying to find out what it's all about, which is ideal for what we're talking about today. I'll be giving the first presentation on a bit of background and overview of Xamarin, how it works, how it does what it does, and then looking at some of the new features in Xamarin 3. And then Filip will give us all the talk on Xamarin Forms, which I'm really looking forward to, which is most of the agenda there. I'll have a slot for news items at the start, so if anyone has any relevant industry news they want to let us know about that isn't on the next slide, then feel free to shout. We've got pizza and cake. Pizza's arriving at 8 o'clock, which hopefully is well timed. The cake, I'm assured, is sitting in the fridge if Rod hasn't eaten it yet. It looks very nice. And then we've got a sponsored bar tab at the Rag and Famish just down the road once we're finished. During the night as well, we've got a few things to give away. Some fantastic stuffed monkeys, which I'm sure you're all desperate to get hold of. I've got a C# shirt, and as well as having one to give away, if you really want one and you don't get it, we've got a way of getting one for yourself for nothing, which is fantastic. I have called memorabilia now. It's a Nokia umbrella, which you can't get anymore. I have a couple of Pluralsight free 1-month trial subscriptions and a couple of other goodies from Pluralsight as well. And also some Mindscape vouchers. Mindscape provide the Raygun component on the Xamarin component store. So if you're interested in that, there's some $50 vouchers there. You can just help yourselves at any point. So a few thank yous to start with. I'll wait for everyone to come and sit down. Welcome. First thank you goes to Envoy, who own these offices. This is our first meeting at this venue, so it's been really great to find somewhere we can all fit and somewhere that works well for presenting. Next is White Clark, and it's all gone very dark. White Clark that myself and Pete here work for. We've got them to thank for the bar tab afterwards, so they'll be very popular. Xamarin themselves, of course, they're sponsoring the pizzas and the cake this evening. And I'll chat a bit about the Evolve conference later, and this discount code will come up as well. So that's unique to members and attendees at these meetup groups around the world to get, I think it's a 15% discount on Evolve tickets. And it's valid for, I believe it's valid for the whole of July. Nearly done with the thank yous. Next one's Pluralsight. They sponsor the group by giving us these goodies to give away. And the one thing I always mention, because I'm really impressed by it, is if anyone in the group, anyone that attends, is out of work at any point and they let me know and we can verify it, then Pluralsight will give you a free month subscription to help you get back into the field. And the last one, I think, is Raygun. Well, Mindscape, as I say, provide the Raygun component and give us these vouchers as well. Okay, on to the news. First news item was the Xamarin Hack Day last month, organised by Michael here. Fantastic success. I think we had over 50 people there, didn't we, Michael?
I think so.
Didn't get a chance, did we? And I had nothing but good feedback from that. I think it went down very well. And I think there's a bit of a spike in membership of this group, partly as a result of that. There was a new Lumia 930 launched fairly recently. Not had a play today. I was kind of hoping Andrew Coates or Vaughan Knight might come along. I see they've been playing with one, but neither of them could make it tonight. And there's that Evolve discount code. Again, if you want to scribble it down, great. If you don't get it, then come chat to me afterwards. I do make the slides available on SlideShare after the event, maybe a day or so after the event. I will have to remove that from the slides that I upload. So if you do want to buy a ticket for that and you want the discount code, just get in touch with me. And my contact details will be at the end. Has anyone else got any news items they think are worth hearing about? This slide seems to be a bit short this month. No, nothing else?
There's going to be a Xamarin Hack Day in Melbourne and Brisbane.
Oh, really?
I think, yes.
Oh, excellent.
And there's another one in Sydney for the 6th of December.
Okay, all right, that's fantastic news. I'll go down very well. Oh, and we should watch out for the videos on the website of the presentations that were given at the last one. So those who couldn't attend, and those who could attend but just want to listen to them again, just keep an eye out on xamarinhackday.com. Okay, on to the first presentation. So some of you will know that relatively recently now, a bit over a month ago I think, Xamarin 3 was announced with a whole host of new features, some very exciting. So I'll run through some of those, but to start with, I've got a bit of background on Xamarin itself for those who are just being exposed to it, getting used to what it does, how it does what it does, and what it can offer. So the first thing to point out is it opens up a massive market for us. I've seen various versions of this slide, and this is the one with the highest number, so this is the one that I like. So we've got pictures of Macs, iPhones, tablets, Android tablets. What's not on there are Google Glass, Android Wear, SDKs fully supported, and the Amazon Fire phone, all recently added to the stable. So the number of supported platforms is increasing at quite a pace. Some of you may have come, I think it was May's meeting, we had Lewis Benj talking about using Xamarin to develop for Google Glass. Okay, so on to some of the features of Xamarin 3. Xamarin are now talking about a number of products that they've got, and this slide has 2. Their website actually now refers to 3. So most of what we look at today will be the Xamarin Platform, the developer tools, the build engine that lets you build for the various platforms. The other 2 offerings that they have are the Xamarin Test Cloud, which is, I believe, is still in beta. It's been in beta for a little while now. But that gives you the option of uploading a compiled app for iOS or Android. It will get deployed to hundreds of physical devices, so all different screen orientations, different screen resolutions, all the different permutations you can think of. You can deploy your app to all those devices. You'll get a nice dashboard showing you which ones it failed on, which ones all your tests completed on. I think the first version of this, you had to write your, remind me, Mark, did you use it? You had to write your test scripts in Ruby. They're talking about supporting C#. I'm not actually on the program, so I don't know if that's fully in yet, but it's certainly on the roadmap. And the last product that they talk about, which I'll cover in a bit more detail a little later, is Xamarin University, which is an online training program that provides Xamarin certification at the end, providing you were paying attention and passed the exam. Okay, so a few words on architecting mobile apps, what options you've got for supporting different platforms, and what Xamarin brings to the party. I have come across people that take this approach, some who are happy with it and don't mind the extra time that it takes and the extra skills that you need. But they refer to this as the silo approach, where if you want to support iOS, then you develop in Objective-C. These days you can talk about developing in Swift as well. If you want to run a native app on Android, then it would be written in Java using Eclipse. And Windows, you traditionally be looking at C# and Visual Studio. So if you're an organization wanting to support multiple platforms, that's 3 different skill sets, 3 different tool sets, probably 3 different teams that you're talking about. Increased time to market and increased risk because you've got so much rewritten code, repetition of code. An option kind of at the other end of the scale, if you like, is typified by tools like PhoneGap, where you will write what is, in simplified terms, a mobile website that gets packaged into what looks and behaves to an extent like a native app, but behind the scenes it's actually still your mobile website rendered in whatever native browser you have on that device. So there are cases where this is a useful option to get something out to market quickly. If you've already got a website in place, then this can be a good way to quickly transition to mobile. But it's never going to give you the functionality, the performance, and the UI responsiveness that you'll get from a fully native app. So you kind of need something halfway between those two things, the best of both worlds, which is where Xamarin comes in. So what you typically do with Xamarin, and I'll talk a little bit about how you structure your source code and your solution to achieve this. You would try and write the bulk of your code, and to use old-fashioned terminology, your business layer, your data layer, would be written in probably a portable class library. So you would write that once, and you would then have an iOS project that references it, an Android project that references it, a Windows Phone project, maybe a Windows Store project, all that reference the same code. And up until a couple of months ago, that was how you did it with Xamarin, and that was great. It gave you the shared code, the single code base on multiple platforms. It gave you a way of using native controls on whichever platform you were deploying to, getting that responsiveness, but also getting that talking to shared code behind the scenes. And it's that separation of concerns lends itself very well to an MVVM style architecture. With that approach, you typically get Xamarin quote, I think, around 75% code sharing between platforms, and then any platform-specific tweaking would go in the individual projects that then reference this common code base. So one of the issues with that black box approach is one of the restrictions is you're limited to the lowest common denominator. You're limited to what you know is going to work on all platforms without much in the way of platform specialization, any platform-specific stuff. Any API interaction that you have is going to be with the API provided by the tool, which is going to be, again, say, the lowest common denominator. The approach with Xamarin is to give you the .NET framework, and those familiar with that will recognize some of these namespaces. And then on Windows platform, so Windows Phone, you get some of these extra ones like Microsoft Phone, Microsoft Devices, Windows Storage. Then on iOS, what you get is the same .NET coverage, and then as part of the Xamarin product, what they give you are bindings to every single platform API. So any specifics like Core Graphics, Core Motion, iBeacon, Xamarin will give you bindings for those, so you can access every single one without that restriction. And similarly, when it comes to Android, you can get the same access to the Android API. Now, sure, that means if you're using some of these, then you're going to have some Android-specific code, or you might have some iOS-specific code. Having said that, there are ways to abstract some of that back as part of the MVVM architecture. I don't think we'll be covering that today, but if you've got questions on that, then feel free to grab me afterwards. But the core takeaway of that is, if you can do it on iOS in Objective-C or Swift, and if you can do it on Android using Java, then you can do it with Xamarin and C# on both those platforms. And there it is again, 2.6 billion. Now that flexibility, that API interaction was a massive gain compared to other ways of doing cross-platform development. You might be able to tell it's the approach that I favour. So we talk now about, I've mentioned native UI, native performance, so we're interacting with native controls and the C#.NET runtime. Let's get this one down. So as if that wasn't enough, then why would you think of using C#? If you're going to find a way to program for all these platforms using one language, what is it that C# specifically brings to the party that some potential alternatives don't. When I first started using Mono, as it used to be called, all I got was that bottom one, the .NET framework, and the ability to use one language across all platforms. And at the point, this is going back a few years now, that was enough for me to start using it. If I look at the top two, either one of those, probably even without the bottom one, will be enough. The ability to use async and await to keep the responsiveness in the UI and to keep the code neat behind it can't be overstated. And then link as well, being able to use link to query your data, query your objects, is very powerful. So that's the background. Are there any questions on just Xamarin in general as yet before we dive into Xamarin 3?
You mentioned that it supports Windows Store's application as well.
Sorry, say again?
You just mentioned that it supports Windows Store's application as well, this framework. I think it just supports Windows Phone.
Yeah, it does vary a little bit, and depending on, we'll come into Xamarin Forms. Xamarin Forms probably impact that a bit more, which is currently only Windows Phone as opposed to Windows Store. I talk about all three platforms at the same time. What Xamarin brings to the party is iOS and Android, and obviously the Microsoft platforms using the Microsoft tools and their build engine. But yes, you're right, there are some limitations at the moment when it comes to Windows Store. Okay, so we'll go into Xamarin 3 and what we've got that's new. So the first one, now that I heard about this quite some time ago and I've been waiting for a while to actually see it, and that's the iOS Designer, User Interface Designer. That is now available both through Xamarin Studio and through Visual Studio. Now what that means is, for those of you who've used Xamarin so far and are used to having to drop down into Xcode to create your zip files or your storyboard files, have a bit of a play with this. Suddenly you don't need to care what an applet is, what an action is. You build your user interface in the same way as you would for Windows Phone. You attach your events to it and you give your controls names in the same way, and it just takes a little bit of the learning curve away and lets you do more in a familiar environment. There are some big IDE enhancements. Now this is talking about Xamarin Studio and some of the new features available in that, which I'll come to shortly. There's also improved code sharing. Some of you might know relatively recent advancements on the Windows Phone side with Windows Phone 8.1 and Windows Store. There are new ways to share code between those projects using a shared project as opposed to a portable class library. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but Xamarin's also adopting that approach, which is great to see. And the last one is Xamarin Forms, which I get quite excited about. But that's down to Filip this evening. He's going to tell us all about that a little bit later. So first, before mentioning the iOS Designer, it's worth pointing out that for 2 years now, you've had an Android User Interface Designer accessible both through Xamarin Studio and through Visual Studio, which has made things an awful lot easier on the Android platform. And then we come on to what's offered by the iOS User Interface Designer now. So as I said, it's fully integrated into both IDEs that you're likely to use. You've got storyboard support for iOS 6 and iOS 7. The event handling, as I said, you don't have to worry about actions and outlets now. That's a lot more intuitive, a lot more what you're likely to be used to, unless you're coming from an Objective-C background, in which case you'll love it because it's easy. More support for auto layouts, and well, they talk about live preview of custom controls. That's giving you stuff that I remember from very old versions of Visual Studio. You make property changes, you make design time changes, you see it rendered in real time on your design surface. So I've got a bit of a video here to show some of the examples. It's got some sound. I don't know if the sound's going to come out very well, but it's more important what you can see. If anyone had got up and danced at that, they'd have got a free monkey. I'm going to have a go at just opening some of that source code and showing you that in Visual Studio now. So fingers crossed this all works smoothly. So this is, you can't quite see it that clearly, but you can see you've got a storyboard here, those who've used storyboards on iOS before. If I come and let me bring up the toolbox. So this is now the list of controls that you've got available. Let me pick a date picker, and you'll see it's terrible on that screen, but you'll see the kind of date picker that you're used to on iOS. And go into properties. The widget, and choose the date picker, and go back in there. One more time. Oh, there we go. So here you've got what before would have been all your iOS specific properties, things that you can change, let's say at design time. So if I, it's in date and time mode at the moment, if I switch it to countdown timer, you'll see it change directly on the design surface, which is always nice to see. Switch it just to date without the time portion. So it really makes designing your user interfaces for iOS specifically an awful lot easier, an awful lot more user-friendly for a developer. And that was the demo. Okay, a few things now about updates to Xamarin Studio. And again, some of you will be familiar with Xamarin Studio up to this point, some perhaps not. Yeah, it's engineered with what they say is a beautiful new look. It does look nicer than it did. You've got Xamarin's blog directly on the design surface there when you first go in, which is always useful. And there are a couple of things that will make quite a difference. I mean, I tend to work in Visual Studio, and I have historically made a lot of use of bringing in NuGet packages, which could be done in Xamarin Studio, but wasn't quite as straightforward. So they now have a fully integrated NuGet package manager to make that more straightforward. And you can see here various Xamarin components that you can bring in that way. Those of you who use things like maybe MVVM Cross or Azure Mobile Services, you might use this to bring in the components to make use of that. Yeah, all of which is now getting easier and easier in Xamarin Studio, as easy as it has been in Visual Studio prior to this. So shared projects, I'll talk a little bit about those now. Historically with Xamarin, there were a couple of different options for doing the common code that would run across platforms. So the one I tended to favour was a portable class library, which is a project in its own right. You'd specify which platforms you wanted that project to target. You put all your code in there, and then you would add a reference to the output of that project to the other projects in your solution. One of the other options, or the other option I should say, was linking individual files. So you would have probably a dummy project with all your shared code in it. When it came to adding your iOS project, instead of referencing this project, you could then do add existing file in Visual Studio, well, and in Xamarin Studio. And when it came to choosing the file and bringing it in, you'd say add as a link instead of making a copy of the file. So then your project file will contain references to source files in other folders. And that way you could bring in, when you compile your iOS project, it would bring in all the code and compile it into an iOS executable. All worked very nicely. And there were always ways of putting platform-specific code into that kind of approach with pre-compiler directives. Could all be done. I've always found that approach a little bit messy because you could add a file to your dummy project and then remember to add it as a link to your Android project, and then go test your iOS project and try and figure out why it wasn't working, to remember that you've forgotten to add that one specific file to your project. You could end up with code with a lot of pre-compiler directives in it, ending up using that functionality probably for more than it's intended. And it was possible to end up with code that's quite difficult to maintain. That was my opinion anyway, so I'd end up taking the portable class library approach. So what we've got now is, as well as still supporting portable class libraries, we have the idea of a shared project, where instead of bringing in an individual linked file, you can reference an entire project in the same way. When it comes to compile time, it does the same as a linked file. It'll bring the source code in and it will compile it as part of that project, as opposed to linking to the DLL of a portable class library. So you can still do put in platform-specific code using pre-compiler directives. There are also some new Xamarin structures you can use to put in platform-specific code. So I've played a little bit with that because I'm comfortable with portable class libraries. I've kind of stuck with those for now, but I can see I might end up going this way. There are some things it makes a little bit simpler, and this approach removes a lot of the downsides of linking individual files like you used to have to. Hopefully that all makes sense. One other thing that's now brought in and integrated into Xamarin Studio is full documentation for the base class libraries of .NET. So you get nice, quick and easy access to that from within Xamarin Studio. And something Xamarin is shouting quite a lot about at the moment. I don't know if we've got any F# developers in here. No, yeah, one. Welcome. There's another F# comment a bit later, so hopefully you'll be happy. But F# is now referred to as a first-class citizen in the Xamarin environment, so fully supported. If you want to start playing with F#, then you can go for it. I'm told you can end up with about half as much code as C#, and I'm told that it's had async and await for years, and C# people are still quite excited about having got it relatively recently. Yeah, there'll be a comment about getting an F# t-shirt a little bit later. But that's the end of the intro to Xamarin and the new Xamarin 3 features apart from Xamarin Forms. So any questions to fire out before we hand over to Filip? You're all waiting for Filip. Oh, yeah, there is one.
How does it work in the background, like when you develop code in Xamarin, how it compiles into native libraries for iOS and Android? So does it like impact the performance? It's like too much of code in there to achieve a functionality as compared to if I create an app in pure iOS or pure Java for Android. So,
yeah, good question, and one that does get asked quite a lot of this approach. Well, I'll take each platform individually to start with. So iOS, the build process on the Xamarin side does a very good job of, if you've added all sorts of references to your code that bring in various parts of the .NET framework, for example, and then your code doesn't use them, the build process will exclude them from the executable. And you can find that if I fell foul of this trying to bring in Azure Mobile Services, for example. I had all the code in my portable class library, I had the references that I needed. I was missing one line to initialize it in the iOS project. Because that was missing, the build process just excluded it all and nothing works. And put that one line in and it realizes you are actually using these reference to DLLs and it will bring them in. It does. It will increase the executable size a little bit. I don't know off the top of my head exactly how much, and it's going to vary by which bits of the .NET framework you're bringing in. I'm not aware of anyone reporting any performance issues as a result of that. And I do know people who've been doing some direct comparisons between a Xamarin application and a pure Objective-C application. And I can point you at one of them if you want to ask them some questions a bit later, if that's all right. On the Android side, it uses just-in-time compilation, the same as if you were using Java. So Java, it will compile down to IL, and then it would go through the Dalvik virtual machine. With Xamarin, it will compile down to IL, and it will go through the Mono virtual machine, which has full access to everything that Dalvik virtual machine has. And I'm told by Xamarin that there are instances where the Mono virtual machine outperforms Dalvik virtual machine. So I've not, it's something that I've looked into quite a lot before adopting this approach, and I've not come across anything to make me say, okay, this is going to have a performance hit, so I better be careful.
Besides that, does it considerably increase the app size? Like if I want to download the app on my mobile, the Xamarin app, does it increase the size considerably as compared to pure iOS, pure Android app?
Probably depends how you define considerably. I'd probably say no, but that's difficult to quantify. Again, I'm not aware of anyone saying it's caused a problem. You look at sizes of apps that are created. Again, I've not seen ones that would cause a significant issue downloading them as opposed to an Objective-C application or a Java application. Any other questions?
It's a question around the shared project and portable class. Does the end output differs if you use either of them? I mean, or is it going to be the same executable?
Good question. I don't think it's going to vary a huge amount. The end product you're going to have the same. Well, internally it's going to vary a little bit, obviously, but
in terms of performance, would it be a difference in the performance? I mean, considerably.
Yeah, I don't see why it would be. It's not something that I've looked into to any extent.
Because typically when you are sharing a project, you are sharing the source code. Whereas when you are in a portable class, you are basically sharing an object code which is compiled.
Exactly.
So would it make a difference in performance runtime?
Again, not that I'm aware of. If you experiment and find differently, then let me know and I'll broadcast it to the group. But yeah, I don't know that it would.
Okay. I mean, would it be the same if I use the same set of source code for both the project? Would it work fine in both the cases?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if you want to do go through a detailed exercise, doing it one way and doing it the other way, then that's what you need to do to compare. I wouldn't expect there to be a sufficiently significant difference to make it worthwhile going to that trouble.
What's the main type of database support you've got in Xamarin? Is it do you get access to what sort of databases can you implement on your are they .NET sort of, or are they Microsoft sort of databases?
You've got a couple of options. The most popular that I've come across is SQLite, because you get that as part of the other platforms, and then on Windows Phone, for example, you can bring in the source code or reference portable class libraries to add that functionality.
Okay,
and
so
there are
that compiles right down to the operating system level for iOS.
I believe there are people here who tried Couchbase. It's not something that I've played with. I've looked at SQLite and not had a reason to look elsewhere, to be honest.
Couchbase Mobile is actually built on top of SQLite anyway.
Okay.
Just checking in there. With the SQLite databases, you get to use queries on inside Xamarin, even though now I'm connected to SQLite databases, so it makes it a bit easier to use them.
You mentioned Link before, for example, so I'm wondering what's going on in the back end there.
It actually compiles down into full SQLite queries, so that's kind of transparent.
So you don't have to use Link only, you can use,
You can use the SQLite queries as is.
Okay. Interesting. They port it across, all the way across.
So there are
So there's obviously no native database engine running in the background continuously in that case. It's not like you're running a full-blown database engine which is running in just it's a single instance, or you're just firing it up and you want to run a single query. It's more like a file system than a database.
Yeah, that's how it works. Usually it works against the file.
Yeah, against the file. So yeah.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, well, thanks very much. I'll hand over to Filip now. Some of his credentials there, so I'll stop short of a full introduction, but I'm sure I'll want to tell you to buy his book when he's finished. Thanks, Phil.